Hello and welcome back, everybody, to the Student's Opinion. Today, we are here for the 10th episode. What is NEP 2020? NEP 2020, or the National Education Policy 2020, was approved by the Union Cabinet in July 2020. It is the third major revamp of education in India post-independence, the previous two being in 1968 and 1986. So this has been a long time coming. In June 2017, the Ministry of Human Resource Development formed a committee chaired by Dr. K. Kasturirangan for preparing the National Education Policy. The committee submitted its report on May 31, 2019. The main principles of the National Education Policy 2020, as mentioned by the government, are flexibility, no hard separations between subjects, curricular and extracurricular activities, multidisciplinary education, conceptual understanding, critical thinking, ethical values, teachers as the heart of the learning process, and a strong public education system. The NEP aims to increase the focus on strengthening teacher training, reforming the existing exam system, early childhood care, and restructuring the regulatory framework of education. The other intentions of NEP include increasing public investment in education, setting up the National Education Commission, increasing focus on vocational and adult education, and strengthening the use of technology. So, Medhaansh, what are your initial thoughts of the National Education Policy?
Well, my perspective on it, and it has always been on the fact that education plays a powerful role in building a nation. And as a result, it also leads to an economic and social progress and decides the future of the country and the destiny of its people as well. Considering the fact that the last education policy reform was in 1986, uh, India had long time coming because the education system we are currently following, and which I think we both have gone through as well, clearly show the fact that things need to catch up to the 21st, how the 21st century operates, how the rest of the world operates right now. So, uh, looking at the perspective of the principles set by the ministry, especially which is chaired by Dr. Kasturi Rangan, who is the former chairman of the Indian Space Research Organization, also known as ISRO, I think they really cover the importance and the things that were missing in the Indian education system, the things that are essentially needed to give India the so-called jump into the modern era, so that their students are much more better prepared for the world that is out here, rather than the world that's just focused only in India.
Yeah, on that fact, I have to agree with you, especially because, as I mentioned previously, the National Education Policy is focusing on reducing the separation between the subjects, curricular and extracurricular activities. So, for the people who are new to the Indian education system, the core subjects are like science, maths, and English. Curricular subjects are subjects that you learn in school, but not every day. It could be like yoga, computer science, physical education. And then you have extracurricular activities, which are like sports you might do, debating, quizzing. And presently in the Indian education system, these have had very rigid separations. So you have a certain time for subjects, a certain time for curricular activities, and certain time for extracurricular activities. And often they're not combined and integrated to provide a more holistic experience for the student. So when I hear that the national education policy is trying to remove these separations and try to help the student learn all three at the same time and that way get a more fulfilling educational experience, I'm actually excited to see what it holds for us.
Yeah, I have to definitely agree with you, Vineet, on this fact, because I'm terribly excited to see what the new education policy has on hold for the new future students of India. Because well, considering the fact that if we look into what the education policy is stating out, we see that what catches my eye, first of all, is that the 10 plus 2 structure is being replaced with the new 5 plus 3 plus 3 plus 4, which is quite fascinating to see on that perspective as well, on the fact that in the Indian government's letting go of the traditional 10 plus 2 evaluation of how we work. So yeah, I'm definitely excited.
Yes, and you did bring up the 10 plus 2 education system. So, how that works to our listeners is that you have your first 10 years of schooling, which is grades 1 to 10. It's divided into primary, middle, and high school, with primary school being grades 1 to 3, middle school being grades 4 to 7, and high school being grades 8 to 10. And after all of these years, you take a board exam. The national board exam that you take, it could be either for your CBSE curriculum or your ICSE curriculum. And then after your board exam, if you pass your board exam, you go to your 11th grade. And then you do 2 years of post-secondary education, 11th and 12th grade. And then you sit for another set of board exams, the 12th grade board exams, after which you can go to college. Now, going to college is a different story. You have to pass the college entrance test for the stream that you wish to study, say engineering or medical or law, and then you can go to college. But then you also have to pass your board exams to be eligible to attend college. Now, that system is being replaced by the NEP. So the NEP is recommending a 5-3-3-4 pattern. So the 5 years would be your foundational years, and that includes your pre-kindergarten, kindergarten, and upper kindergarten, followed by grades 1 and 2. So that's your foundational course, after which you take a state census exam in class 3. Then you have 3 years of preparatory school, which is classes 3 to 5, after which you take another exam, another state census exam. And then you have 3 years of middle school, which are grades 6 to 8, and you take another census exam after that. And finally, you have 4 years of secondary education, which is grades 9 to 12, a lot similar to the system that other countries follow, like the United States has grades 9 to 12 as high school. So that is the reform that's being proposed in the national education policy. Also, I mentioned state census exams. So those are like mini board exams that students take to help educators know what the academic accomplishments of the students are who are passing out. And finally, the NEP is also recommending a restructuring of the 10th board exam, and it would and the board exam would focus mainly on testing the skills, core concepts, and higher order thinking capacities of students. And it would put more emphasis on these subjects rather than memorization, which is a big part of exams presently.
Yeah, as you've spoken about the board exams as well, what's interesting to also see the fact that board exams will continue to be held in class 10 and 12. I have like no issues on that perspective of what the new education policy states. But what's interesting to know that they'll be, as you said, they'll be redesigned with an holistic development which is the aim. And I don't think you've mentioned this, but there's also a new standard for this new National Assessment Center, which is codenamed PARAC, which stands for Performance Assessment, Review, and Analysis of Knowledge for Holistic Development. So it's really interesting to see how the new national how a new standard has been set on how it's going to be assessed instead and the government has also realized the fact that the old education norms and standards have slowly died out and they need to move on with time. What's also interesting to note is that according to the policy, the mother tongue or local or regional language is to be the medium of instructions in all schools up to class 5 and preferably till class 8 and beyond, which and also under the NEP 2020 Sanskrit will be offered at all levels and foreign languages from the secondary school level. So which is interesting to note because not a lot of schools will or I mean at least in my knowledge the ICSE or even the CBSE curriculums across India don't offer not all schools offer Sanskrit. Considering the fact that Sanskrit is the core language of India, I mean the language from which various other languages have, risen out and have come across. It's really interesting to see how all these languages are being incorporated so as to ensure that the Indian culture, the beauty of Indian culture and diversity is clearly seen even in its education.
Now, you did bring up two important points there, and I have some problems with both of them. And let me start off with Sanskrit. Now, you do say that Sanskrit is the historic language of India, and I don't deny that fact. In fact, I think Sanskrit should be encouraged, but I think that since Sanskrit is not that widely used today in general conversation, I don't think it should be given that much emphasis as, say, a regional language which a person might use to converse with people around them in their neighborhood, in their vicinity. So I think more emphasis should be given on the regional languages rather than Sanskrit, which is more of a theoretical language in a sense rather than a practical, useful language. And I believe that what you teach at school should be something that you can use outside of school. So that's why I think that making Sanskrit more accessible might not be the best idea when those resources could be focused on increasing the accessibility to the local regional languages. And the second thing that you mentioned about how regional languages are going to be the medium of instruction, I think that would be amazing. However, for students who are looking to study outside of India, they'll have a slightly difficult time because, for now, say a student wants to come and study in the United States and their language of instruction has not been English, then they would have to pass the TOEFL exam or any other exam to show their English language proficiency. Now, if you have your entire language of instruction be a regional language, then your English knowledge is obviously going to be lacking a bit, and you're going to have to get extra preparation to crack the TOEFL exam and show that you're actually proficient at English. Now, this is again a niche problem. Not many people do look to study outside of India, so I actually am happy that they're promoting regional languages as more of a first language at schools rather than as a second language. That way, students are able to relate to their local customs and local cultures. But I still think that the English language should be given a bit of priority because in the modern age, in the 21st century, English is basically the language that the world speaks.
Well, true. I think considering what you are pointing out, the fact as well, yeah, English is one of the core languages given the fact that India was under 200 years of British rule. So, and English is also used for official work in India, not only in the terms of education, it's also used in the law works for signing documents, agreements, but and yeah, I think what the education policy might be trying to do, I don't know, maybe this is a very weird way of considering it, is the fact that it wants to restrain, I guess, the brain drain from India, which keeps occurring, as you keep saying, as you stated the fact as well, that people leave our nation and go abroad to study in the United States, the United Kingdom, or various other countries where English is in the mode language. So I think by restraining it, they might also be trying to, stop the brain drain from India, which it's rather fascinating to see the fact that the government might be trying to restrain the brain drain on that perspective. I also have a slight problem with the fact that the mother tongue or local regional languages should be the medium of instruction. Now, given the fact that I've lived in Karnataka my entire life, but I can't speak a word of Kannada. Like my second language was Hindi, and I'm quite fluent with it. And my first language of the more medium of instruction in my school was English. Now, what happens to these students who come from various other parts of India, have never even read or studied a particular that particular language as well? What happens to them? We are such a diverse country, and I don't see how it helps how the education policy helps them out. Although one could argue on the fact that the policy aims on reducing the curriculum load of students and allows them to become more multidisciplinary and multilingual. So yeah, perhaps you can argue on that, but I'm rather dissatisfied on that perspective.
Oh, yes, that is one thing I completely did not consider. Yeah, we do have a lot of migration in India from like north of India to the southern states, especially because of better job opportunities. And I do not consider how making the regional language compulsory would affect those people as well. Because then again, you want to learn about your mother tongue and you want to learn the language of the place where you come from, and forcing another regional language might not actually suit them. And that sort of ties in with the problem that there's too much diversity in India. And don't get me wrong, too much diversity is good, but then when you have to legislate about it and set rules, that's when too much diversity becomes the problem, as we're seeing in this case. So I don't really have a solution for it. I think in that sense, we just leave the regional language to be a second language rather than make it a first language. And that would also help the people who wish to study abroad to get that English proficiency without having to take the exams.
Yeah, I think I would like the old education policies point of maintaining English as the medium of language and keeping regional languages as second or third would be considered the most viable, given the fact that, well, given the fact that we are one of the biggest, we have one of the biggest populations in the world, right? And we have to understand the fact that with with the diversity that our population brings into, it's really hard to learn each and every language that India has to offer, and as a result, I think that maybe retaining that point of this a point of the education system might be the only viable option. So in order to understand the fact that there is a huge sense of migration from north to south, east to west, west to east, and even south to north for job offers, etc. Now, the next thing that I noticed in the education system, and what I quite frankly liked, is that there's no rigid separation between arts and sciences, between curricular and extracurricular activities, and between vocational and academic stream. So, Vineet, what do you think about this? Because personally, I feel extremely delighted of the fact that, yes, no, I mean, this is what we needed while we were studying in India, and India's education system. And I'm quite happy for the future generations of India because. Because as a student, I feel that the rigid separation between arts and sciences is nonsensical, because both of them are derive from each other. And yeah, I feel quite delighted. What do you think about it, Vineet?
Yes, at the beginning, I also did mention that I'm excited that the separations between curricular, extracurricular, and academic subjects are being reduced. And you also brought up the fact of vocational courses. So, this is what the NEP 2020 recommends with respect to vocational courses. It says that students in classes 9 to 12 must receive vocational education on at least one vocation. And schools should build expert curriculum delivery methods that are aligned with the National Skills Qualification Framework competency levels. Additionally, higher education institutes like colleges must also provide vocational courses that are integrated into undergraduate education programs. So, through all this, we can see that the new education policy is adding an emphasis to vocational training along with core academic training. And as a student presently who's taking a vocational course, which is a mechatronics course, so I've seen and experienced vocational courses firsthand, and I have to say that the opportunities that they have are really exciting. While at school, you just have the curriculum that you study for an exam. You might do some lab activities, which are also geared towards preparing you for the exam. With a vocational training course, you're more preparing yourself for a job, for a skilled job. And in that sense, the training that you're getting there is completely different. Rather than focusing on an exam and having an exam oriented curriculum, you're having a more job oriented curriculum. And you don't just learn skills related to your vocation, you also learn other important soft skills like communication and leadership. So I think that was what was lacking in the Indian education system so far, where we've had so much emphasis on just exams and academic rigor that we have not tried to instill other skills among our students. And I think you would agree on that.
Yeah, I definitely agree on the fact that not all skills have been instilled in the students, and there has been a significant divide between vocational education and academic stream. I mean, we can understand why it was done so in the old education policy, given the fact that India at that time wasn't I mean, India at that time was going through a lot of crisis and struggles. Yeah, India was just a newly formed nation who had just received its independence, and was, trying to set itself on the world stage. So yeah, I get why it has been said right now, why it had been said then. And yeah, and I simply love the fact that the rigid separation between vocational and academic stream is removed. And I'm quite excited to see the new amount of stuff that the future students in India will be able to get.
True. And I think the final thing we have to address with the national education policy is the National Research Foundation. So we all know that research has not been the biggest focus of India so far. And even top institutions like IITs have been saying that we really need more money and grants for research to become a more research oriented country, like many of the first world countries like the United States and European countries, which focus heavily on research in their academia. So the NEP has recommended an establishment of a National Research Foundation, which would be an autonomous body to administer the mentoring, funding, and capacity building for quality research in India. Now, I don't know about you, but that sounds like great news because at the end, higher academia is supposed to be focused on research and development so that we can advance the lives of people by improving technology that presently exists. And in India, we really haven't had those sort of opportunities in higher academia so far. So with the national education policy, that might all be changing, right?
Yes, I completely agree with what you have just pointed out as well, and I missed pointing this out before as on the national education policy, and I completely agree with the fact that how India is going into a research basis mode because. Well, right now, considering the fact that I'm doing the IB in the Netherlands, and the IB is more of a research based education system, and I found it a bit hard to get grasp and get into it when it first started, given the fact that my the early I studied the early education system in India, and it wasn't very research based. So I'm quite happy for the new in for the for this new education policy and for the students in India, because this gives them the equal advantage when they go to study abroad, and they can understand, instead of just learning and doing stuff that has already been present in a book or everything. They can do stuff on their own, research it and understand why it is present, instead of just learning, okay, this is this is that, and and they're all bored, and then they're like, okay, yeah, I just did it, I just want to pass through. I think that what the new education policy succeeds in doing is the fact that it might make the students much more energetic in going to the campuses, going to schools, and trying to learn something on the new. I think you would agree on the fact that in the movie, I think what the new education policy does is follows exactly what the movie Three Idiots had said, that कभी तुमने सोचा है कि ऐसे क्यों होता है, as in why does it happen, why are you studying it, what's the point of studying if you don't understand it thoroughly. So I think the research capability, by increasing the research capability in the education policy, this pushes India to the new to make new India, the Naya Bharat, the Naya Hindustan, towards the 21st century. In fact, it propels it to compete with countries which are superpowers like the United States and the United Kingdom in terms of research.
Absolutely. And that's what I think really tops off this national education policy. I really cannot come up with one word to describe it because it just has everything that I dreamed of as a high schooler when I really started seeing some of the sort of problems in the education system. But like everything good, there even the NEP has some drawbacks, and I think we must discuss that before we conclude this episode. So, what are some drawbacks that you see at the moment?
Well, like every other education policy in the world, there'll always be some hits and misses. Uh, Considering we have to even consider this fact that after a gap of 34 years, the Indian government has decided to change and incorporate new recommendations. So I think some of the biggest misses that the education policy fails to consider is the fact that it fails to maintain the status quo of having the curriculum under one ministry, and instead it implements it with three different ministries. And but till date, this strategy has led to poor integration of the ECCE with elementary education, and the NEP's recommendation of a joint task force doesn't seem like an adequate measure to address this well-known gap. Also, there's a lack of clarity around whether every Agnavadi or pre-primary learning center will be equipped with a high-quality teacher and a worker, which is also called Sevika in the curriculum. Because if we don't have teachers who are highly trained on what they're supposed to be doing, then what's the use of bringing a new education policy at all? So there has to be some form of clarity as to what defines the teacher's quality on that perspective, and the workers who will be working to teach the students as well. So I have a few more points as well, but what do you think about these 2 points, Vineet?
Yes, Medhaansh. So, as you mentioned, with any new education policy, you need to be able to implement it to call it a success. Just having the solution on paper is one thing, but implementing it is a completely different beast. And in that sense, getting these skilled teachers to work in your new Anganwadis and having qualified teachers at all levels is going to be a challenge, especially with transitioning away from the present rote learning system, majorly focusing on the rote learning, to a more equitable and holistic system. And another point I wanted to bring up was that the new education policy is not really addressing the fact that there's still a lot of competition and one cannot discover their true passion without any sense of fear. So, like if you look to Western countries, there's a more non competitive environment in which students can experiment, fail, and learn. And they can do that all without a sense of fear that, okay, if I fail on this one test, I still have a chance to make it up later on. But then, even in the new education policy in India, you still have that dreaded sense that if you end up messing up on an exam, like an entrance exam to a college, you won't get your desired college. So that is something that I think could be changed and might have to come with another education policy. But that is one of the shortcomings I see of the national education policy. And another thing related to testing is that the NEP creates a national testing agency, which is generating skepticism. So it's envisaged as a premier expert autonomous testing organization to conduct entrance examinations for colleges and higher education. But a lot of colleges feel that this is leading to a loss of autonomy about their own admissions. So, say an IIT, its admissions are generally conducted by the JEE Advanced examination, which is administered by an IIT itself. But under the new national education policy, this exam would be administered by the NTA, and in that sense, the IIT does not really get that much autonomy about how they select students for their programs.
Definitely, and I was just about to bring up that point as well on the standard setting and school accreditation. Now, the education policy has missed this terribly on the fact with oversight frameworks like school quality assessments and accreditation framework, also known with its acronym SQAAF. Standards by the SSSA, which is known as State School Standards Authority. That leads to and it's monitoring by the Department of Education and regular testing by the SSC board. And I think there is an impression of too much oversight of this on the school functioning. And the policy mentions that the public schools should become the most attractive option for parents while simultaneously losing the criteria to set up private schools. Now, I'm very unclear about this. Like, do you want the parents to choose public schools, or do you not want them to go on to private schools? Is this a direct attack on private schools and promotion of public schools? I have no clue on what this. Now, there's some unintended consequences as well, which the education policy fails to consider as well. That but well, like you said about JE, I think I would like to restate the point again that by public disclosure of learning outcomes on the website, on school websites or SSSA websites, while interesting it is in principle, will cause a high pressure by the school on the students to perform or teachers to show high test scores, leading to a high stakes testing career, thus negating the point made earlier around testing being more for development and support rather than anything else. And also the losing of criteria of setting up private schools, which mostly be adopted by low cost private schools, resulting in the stratification of students' educational experience and an attitude of low cost is good enough for the poor. And also maybe I think maybe I don't know, it's an unintended consequence or not, but by multiple monitoring and overseeing frameworks by different institutions, it might just lead to over bureaucratization and advancing the regulation of the education system, which I think frankly is already present well enough in our country. We don't need a bureaucracy to be over bureaucratized. I mean, can you imagine? Even I can't imagine the problems that will happen if it's over bureaucratized on that perspective.
Yes, all your points are valid, and I wanted to bring some of them up too after you spoke, but then you just presented all of them most cogently. So I agree with all of that. And as I did state before the section, that every good thing has its own disadvantages, and these are some of the disadvantages that we found during our research of the NEP 2020. Do you have any things to propose for, say, another education policy which would address these shortcomings of the NEP?
Yeah, I think in terms of while this education policy is definitely a game changer in how India addresses its education, I believe that a large number of things can be fixed. Uh, and I can go on and make a list about it, but I think some of the biggest thing is to make certain policies and points very clear as to how the education policy and system is supposed to work so that there's no confusion on that perspective. And also it can and so that we can really understand, whether what exactly the Indian government is trying to propose and do. So yeah, I think aside from revisiting this education policy and making a series of amendments and making it very clear, I think this education policy is just gonna be one of the game changers for India in the 21st century.
And game changer is the right word. And I think we should conclude on that. That while we did at the end of this podcast berate the education system about its shortcomings, it is still a massive step forward compared to where we have been for the past years with an outdated education system, especially one that's 34 years old. And I think with that, we can conclude our 10th episode here on the student's opinion. This episode is exclusively available on Spotify for the first 2 days, after which it will be available on YouTube, Amazon Music, and Google Podcasts. Do subscribe to our YouTube channel to be notified when future episodes drop, and comment on what you thought of this episode. If you have any suggestions, be sure to email us at contact.thestudentsopinion@gmail.com. For now, it is Medhaansh and I, signing off.